Good day, I am Bob. It's my pleasure to narrate for Polly's PE Notes. Today we want to look at the muscular system. We will be focusing on the muscle fibers. The gluteus maximus is the body's largest muscle and the ear contains the smallest muscles in the body. Please remember that muscle can only pull bone, muscles cannot push a bone to cause movement. The heart is the hardest working muscle in the body. It pumps 5 quarts of blood per minute and 2,000 gallons daily. Smooth muscle cells are found in the walls of hollow organs such as the stomach, intestines, urinary bladder and uterus, and in the walls of passageways, such as the arteries and veins.
Our muscular system obviously is our muscles, and muscles are important in keeping the homeostatic conditions of our body. It's particularly important for us when we breathe, and also for movement, such as lifting weights, for example, or lifting anything. It's also important because it gives us heat and provides us with balance and also stabilizing our joints. Now, there are 3 types of muscles. There is the skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. We'll begin with looking at skeletal muscle just briefly. Now, skeletal muscle is essentially the muscle which we require when we move and when we lift things up. Skeletal muscle differs to the other type of muscles because they usually connect to the ends of bones, such as the thigh bone, for example, and they're voluntary and also striated. They're voluntary because when we move our arms, we are voluntarily moving them. And so, for example, skeletal muscles are the muscles such as our bicep muscles, our pectoralis major, and our quadriceps, for example. And so if we zoom into this particular skeletal muscle, a skeletal muscle cell is cylindrical shape, and as I mentioned, they're also striated. But another important feature of a skeletal muscle is that it is multinucleated, which means that it consists of multiple nucleuses. And this is what differs skeletal muscle to, for example, cardiac muscle, and the other one, the smooth muscle. So the second type of muscle I would like to look at is the cardiac muscle. And the cardiac muscle essentially implies the heart, because cardiac implies heart. And so we're looking at the heart muscles, such as this area here. Cardiac muscles are amazing because they keep contracting until the day we die to pump blood around our body. Cardiac muscles are involuntary, meaning that we have no conscious over it. And so that is why we have no conscious over our beating heart. And cardiac muscles are also actually striated, like skeletal muscles. So if we zoom into the cardiac muscles in this heart, for example, we can see a few cardiac muscle cells here. Cardiac muscle cells are either uninucleated or binucleated in that they have 1 or 2 nucleuses per cell. And each muscle cell are separated by what's called intercalated discs, which help combine each cardiac muscle cell, as well as assisting in transmitting nerve impulses throughout the heart during contraction. The last type of muscle we're going to look at is the smooth muscles, and smooth muscles are found in the stomach and in the intestines, essentially the gastrointestinal tract, or GIT. And they usually wrap around each of these organs to assist in the movement of food down the gastrointestinal tract, from our mouth to our anus, essentially. And this movement of food down this gastrointestinal tract is known as peristalsis, and this is assisted by the smooth muscle cells. And so as expected, smooth muscle cells are involuntary in that we have no conscious control over it. And what differs smooth muscle cells to cardiac and skeletal muscle is that they are unstriated. They contain no striations whatsoever. And so if we zoom into this part of the stomach, duodenum, part of the small intestines, we can look at the smooth muscles, and you can see that they're unstriated. They contain no striations, and each cell is also uninucleated in that it contains only 1 nucleus. And so, for example, this group of smooth muscle cells, they are in a relaxed position. And when they contract, what essentially happens is that they squeeze together. And when they squeeze together, this is what allows the movement of food down our gastrointestinal tract. And so that was a brief overview about 3 types of muscles and the muscular system.
When a limb of your body is moved in any way, in any direction, for any purpose, muscles and tendons accommodate this movement by elongating or shortening at various key spots. The masseter in the jaw is the strongest muscle in the body as it allows the teeth to close with a force of up to 200 pounds on the molars. Low muscle tone, also known as hypotonia, is used to describe muscles that are floppy. Persons with low muscle tone may need to put in more effort to get their muscles moving properly when they are performing everyday activities. Did you know that 85% of the heat produced in your body comes from muscle contraction? Every body is born with differing numbers of slow and fast twitch muscle fibers. The distribution, however, is generally determined by genetics. Type 2B fast twitch muscles have the ability to burn oxygen, along with glucose and fat, for energy.
When you think of muscles, your mind usually goes straight to the guns there, but you really have 3 different types of muscle in your body. You have the cardiac muscle, your heart muscle, which is different from all the sorts of muscle in your body, and then you have smooth muscle, which is responsible for carrying out most of your involuntary processes like pushing food through your digestive tract and pushing blood through your arteries, important stuff there. And then there's the muscles that you're most familiar with, the skeletal muscles. Your gluteus maximus, your masseter, which is, important for chewing your hot pockets, the abductor pollicis brevis, right at the base of your thumb, aka your video game muscles. That's important for the Assassin's Creed. Just some of the 640 skeletal muscles you have. Those muscles, like all of your muscles, are only good at 2 things: contracting to become shorter and relaxing back out to their resting length. That's all muscles do. They contract and they relax. Pretty amazing that you can make a ballerina out of that. If you were to peel back my skin and take a look at one of my muscles, please don't do that, but if you did, you'd see that it thickens in the middle at what's called the muscle belly, and then it tapers off on either end into a tendon. Tendons are made of fibrous proteins, mostly collagen, that connect the muscle to the bone. Just a side note, ligaments, similar to tendons, but instead they connect bones to other bones. These muscle-tendon combos stretch across one or more joints. In this case, it stretches across my elbow, so that one bone can move in relation to the other bone. So I just moved my arm, and now I'm moving my mouth, and I'm basically moving my whole body right now. And the question is, how am I doing this? How am I moving all of these things in all this sort of amazing fluid ways? How am I able to do that at all? Unfortunately, it's kind of complicated, but it's wonderful and amazing, so it will be worth it in the end. First, we need to understand the anatomy of a skeletal muscle, which includes many, many layers of long, thin strands. Think of one of your skeletal muscles as a rope. It's made of smaller ropes that are bundled together, and then those ropes are made of bundles of thread, and those threads are made of tiny, tiny filaments. This structure is what makes meat stringy, because after all, meat is just muscle. This chicken breast is, or was, the pectoralis major muscle of a chicken. It connected the bird's sternum or breastbone to the humerus in its wing, and sometimes I feel like chickens have bigger pecs than I do. This is crazy. When you peel this muscle apart, you see that it's really made up of layers of thin strings. These are muscle fascicles, and each fascicle is made up of lots and lots of smaller strands. These we can't see. They're called muscle fibers, and these are the actual muscle cells.
Proteins inside your muscles are organized into long chains that can interact with each other, causing them to shorten, or lengthen and relax. The architecture of muscle fascicles determines the force that a muscle can generate. Exercising adds tension to your muscles, causing them to tear slightly. Our bodies rebuild these tears by adding either sarcomeres or myofibrils. Muscles shorten and bulge when all the adjacent Z-lines are pulled closer along in the myofibril.
So a skeletal muscle cell, as I mentioned in the introduction video, is cylindrical shaped and multinucleated. And a skeletal muscle cell is known as a muscle fiber. And interestingly enough, skeletal muscle cell, the fibers, are striated by a highly organized internal arrangement. So this muscle fiber has an internal arrangement. So if we pull pull some things out from this muscle fiber, we can find myofibrils. So muscle fiber contains many myofibrils. And if we take a portion of this myofibril, we can see that it's made out of some interesting structures known as the thin and thick filaments. So the myofibrils contain thick and thin filaments. The red is the thick and the blue is the thin filaments. But of course, the muscle fiber, the muscle cell, is actually part of a bigger organized structure. So if we look at this bone and a skeletal muscle which attaches on it, and we cut a cross section of skeletal muscle, we have the muscle, the organ. And so this is what the muscle looks like as an organ. And the muscle contains, if we look at the cross section, different portions of the muscles, and we'll look into this soon. But the muscle contains an outer connective tissue layer known as the epimysium. And I hope I pronounced that right. And so if we take one of these portions of the muscle here, the portion of the muscle is known as a fascicle. And the fascicle also contains other internal structures. And the outer sort of connective membrane tissue is known as a perimysium. And then if we pull out one of these other internal structures of this fascicle, the portion of the muscle, this is where our muscle fiber is. And the muscle fiber contains a connective tissue wrapping around it known as the endomysium. And remember that a muscle fiber is the muscle cell. So this is this. And also the muscle fiber, the muscle cell, contains a membrane known as a sarcolemma. And again, if we remember, if we take one of the internal structures of the muscle fiber, we have a myofibril. And the myofibril contains the thin filaments and the thick filaments. So let's just recap. If we start off with a whole muscle, an organ, and we get a portion out of that, we get the muscle fascicle, which is the portion of the muscle. And the muscle fascicle contains many muscle fibers, the actual muscle cells. And then again, the muscle fiber, the muscle cell, contains many internal structures, the myofibrils. So muscle fiber contains many myofibrils, which are specialized intracellular structures. And the myofibrils are the ones that contain thick and thin filaments, also known as the cytoskeleton elements. And so we will concentrate on the myofibrils, the specialized intracellular structures of the muscle fiber. And we'll specifically look at a portion of the myofibril. And the portion of the myofibril, they all contain the thin filament, here in blue, and the thick filament, here in red. And an important terminology to know is a sarcomere. And a sarcomere runs from one Z-line to another Z-line. So from basically one thin filament Z-line to another thin filament Z-line. And so if we zoom into this one sarcomere, here we have the thin filaments made up of actin, and the center of the sarcomere we have what's called the M-line. And from the M-line in the center we have the thick filaments, which are made up of a protein, myosin. And we have other internal structures here in orange, which we will look into later on. But remember, sarcomere runs from one Z disk or Z line to another Z disk to another Z line. And this is a thin and thick filament structure, a sarcomere structure. But let's have a closer look at one sarcomere. So here we have one sarcomere, with the center being called the M line here. And the sarcomere runs from one Z disk to another Z disk, or a Z line to another Z line here. And a sarcomere is a section and extends from one Z disk to the next Z disk. And the sarcomere is the smallest contractile unit of muscle, so you can say. And so when a sarcomere contracts, or when a lot of sarcomere contracts, this is when our muscles contract, when we move, for example. And so again, looking over the anatomy of the sarcomere, we have here the thin filaments, which are made up of a protein called actin. And then we have the thick filaments made up of a protein called myosin. And then these orange things, which connect to the thick and thin filaments, are elastic filaments made up of a protein called titin. But the most important thing to know from this structure is that myosin forms thick filaments and that actin protein forms thin filaments.
Here are some key terms found in this video. Next video we will take a closer look at the sliding filament theory. Goodbye.